I pressed harder on the accelerator, watching the speedometer needle climb past 60. The winding road ahead disappeared into sheets of water that hammered my windshield faster than the wipers could clear them. I'd been driving for 40 minutes, leaving the rural property where I'd spent 6 hours photographing a restored barn for some architectural magazine that paid barely enough to cover gas. 29 years old and still chasing freelance scraps. My parents would have had opinions about that if they were still alive to voice them. 3 years gone, and I still reached for my phone sometimes to call them before remembering. Headlights appeared in my rearview mirror, high beams cutting through the storm. They'd been there for miles now. 10, at least. Maybe more. Rural Oregon at 11 p.m. didn't exactly have traffic, and this car maintained the same distance no matter how fast or slow I drove. I tested it, slowed to 45. The lights fell back, sped up to 65. They matched my pace exactly. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel. The leather was slick with the nervous sweat coating my palms despite the November cold seeping through the doors. I told myself it was coincidence. Just another driver heading toward Portland on the same empty highway. But my gut, the same instinct that had kept me safe covering protests and police raids for newspapers that could barely afford to pay me, screamed otherwise. The bridge over the Willamette River emerged from the darkness ahead. 2 lanes, narrow, the metal grating slick with rain and fallen leaves. I'd crossed it 100 times, but tonight, with those headlights burning holes in my mirror and my heart trying to punch through my ribs, it looked different. Dangerous. I accelerated into the curve. Too fast. I knew it the second my tires lost traction. The car lurched sideways. I yanked the wheel right. Overcorrected. The world became a blur of motion and terror. Metal shrieked as my bumper clipped the guardrail. Then nothing was underneath me anymore. Just air. And falling. The impact with the water felt like hitting concrete. My head snapped forward against the seatbelt. Pain exploding behind my eyes. Water rushed through the seams around the doors immediately. Shockingly cold, stealing my breath. I fumbled for the seatbelt release with hands that wouldn't work properly. My camera bag had flown from the passenger seat and pinned my right leg against the console. The car tilted forward, nose sinking faster than the back. Water was at my waist. Then my chest. Panic clawed up my throat. I finally got the seatbelt free and shoved the camera bag aside. My ribs screamed in protest. Broken or bruised, didn't matter. I grabbed the door handle and pulled. Nothing. I pulled again, throwing all my weight against it. The pressure of the water outside held it shut like a tomb sealing itself. The water was at my neck. My breath came in short, desperate gasps as I tilted my head back to keep my mouth above the rising waterline. My hand scrambled across the door, searching for the window button. Found it. Pressed it. Dead. Of course the electronics were dead. The water covered my mouth. I took one last gulp of air before it reached my nose. Then I was under. My lungs burned. I pounded on the window with my fists, accomplishing nothing except sending jolts of pain up my arms. The darkness outside the car was absolute. I couldn't tell up from down anymore. Couldn't tell if the car was still sinking or if we'd hit bottom. My vision started to narrow. Black spots eating at the edges. My chest felt like it would cave in. I was going to die here. 29 years old, drowned in a river because someone had sabotaged my brakes. I didn't even know why. Didn't know who. Wouldn't get the chance to find out. The window exploded inward. Glass shredded the water around me. A hand grabbed my arm. Then another. Strong. Pulling. I was too oxygen-deprived to help much, but whoever had me dragged me through the broken window anyway. The jagged edges caught my jacket. My jeans. Probably my skin. I didn't care. We were moving up. Had to be up because my lungs demanded it. We broke the surface. I gasped. Coughed. Choked on water I'd inhaled. Gasped again. Hands held me up, keeping my head above water even as I convulsed and tried to breathe and vomit at the same time. "I've got you." A man's voice. Deep. Rough with exertion. "Don't fight me. Just breathe." I couldn't have fought if I wanted to. My body had given up on me entirely. He swam us toward shore, one arm hooked under my chest, his legs doing all the work. When we reached the muddy bank, he lifted me out like I weighed nothing and laid me on my back. His face was a dark silhouette against the storm clouds. "Ambulance is coming," he said, his hands pressed against my ribs, checking for injuries. I cried out. He muttered something that might have been an apology. Then he was shrugging out of his coat and draping it over me. Heavy, expensive, still warm from his body. "Who?" I managed. My voice sounded like I'd been gargling gravel. "Doesn't matter." He stood up, water streaming from his clothes. I saw him better now. Tall, broad shoulders, dark hair plastered to his head, blood running down his temple from a cut near his hairline. More blood on his hands from the glass. "You're safe." Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. He stepped back into the shadows. "Wait." I tried to sit up. Failed. "I don't even know your name." But he was already gone. The ambulance arrived 4 minutes later. Paramedics wrapped me in heated blankets and checked my vitals while police officers descended on the scene with lights and questions. I answered what I could through chattering teeth. Yes, I'd lost control. No, I didn't know why. Yes, someone had pulled me out. No, I didn't know who. They loaded me into the ambulance. As the doors closed, I caught a glimpse of my car being pulled from the river. The roof was completely caved in. The driver's side was a mangled mess of twisted metal. Looking at it, I couldn't understand how anyone had gotten me out of that. Couldn't understand how I was still breathing. I woke up in a hospital room that smelled like disinfectant and bad coffee. A nurse with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a practical bun smiled when she saw me conscious. "Welcome back, sweetheart. You gave us quite a scare." "How long?" My throat felt like sandpaper. 3 hours since you came in." She adjusted the IV in my arm. "You've got some bruised ribs, mild hypothermia, and more cuts than I can count, but you're incredibly lucky. Doctor will be in soon to explain everything." "The man who brought me in." I pushed myself up despite my body's protests. "Where is he?" Her expression shifted to something between confused and concerned. "He didn't stay, honey. Brought you in dripping wet, covered in blood from cuts all over his hands and face. We tried to check him out, but he refused treatment. Left before anyone could even get his name." She glanced at the chair beside my bed. "Left his coat, though. Expensive thing. Must have cost several $1,000s. I looked where she was pointing. The coat was draped over the chair, still damp, with embroidery visible on the inside collar. Initials in gold thread. CR. The police came an hour later. 2 detectives, one older with a face like worn leather, one younger who took notes on everything I said. They asked about the accident, about my speed, about whether I'd been drinking. Standard questions delivered without much warmth. Then the older detective's expression changed. "Miss Collins, we need to talk about your vehicle." "What about it?" "Brake lines were cut. Professionally. This wasn't an accident. The hospital kept me for 2 days. Standard procedure for hypothermia, they said. Even mild cases. I spent most of that time staring at the coat and trying to figure out who CR was, and why someone wanted me dead badly enough to cut my brake lines. The police had no leads, no suspects, just questions I couldn't answer. When they finally released me, my best friend's boyfriend picked me up and drove me home. My apartment felt different, smaller, less safe. I thanked him, waited for him to leave, then locked every lock on my door and shoved a chair under the handle for good measure. My camera equipment. The thought hit me like ice water. It had been in the car. Thousands of dollars of gear that I'd saved for years to afford. I called the police station. After 20 minutes of hold music, someone told me my belongings had been recovered, and I could pick them up at my convenience. I went the next morning. The desk sergeant handed me a plastic bin with my camera bag, miraculously intact, and a manila envelope with my memory cards. I signed the release forms and took everything home, my hands shaking the entire time. That night, I spread everything out on my living room floor. 3 cameras, 6 lenses, 24 memory cards from the last month of work. I started with the most recent, scrolling through images on my laptop with obsessive focus. There had to be something. Some clue to why someone wanted me silenced. The corporate event from a week ago. I'd been hired to photograph a charity gala at the Benson Hotel. Rich people in expensive clothes drinking expensive wine and pretending they cared about whatever cause was trendy that month. I'd shot 500 images that night, delivered the best 50 to the client, and forgotten about it. I scrolled through the rejects. The blurry ones. The ones where someone blinked or turned away. The parking lot shots I'd taken while waiting for my car from valet. And then I stopped. The image was slightly out of focus, shot from across the parking structure. But the details were clear. 4 men standing beside a black SUV. One held a briefcase open, stacks of cash visible inside. Another held what was definitely a gun, not even trying to hide it. I zoomed in on their faces. One of them I recognized vaguely. Antonio something. I'd seen his photo in articles about organized crime investigations that went nowhere. But it was the 4th man who made my breath catch. He stood slightly apart from the others, watching the transaction with an expression of calculated assessment. Even out of focus, he was striking. Sharp features, dark hair, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that moved with him like water. And on the key ring dangling from his hand, I could make out the initials on the leather fob. CR. The man who saved me had been at that event, had been part of whatever illegal transaction I'd accidentally photographed, which meant he knew exactly who I was. Had known before he pulled me from that river. Someone knocked on my door. I jumped hard enough to knock my laptop off my knees. It clattered to the floor. The knock came again, firmer this time. I grabbed my phone, ready to call 911, and crept toward the door. Looked through the peephole. It was him. Even through the distortion of the peephole, I recognized him. The same sharp features from the photograph. The same controlled posture that suggested he was comfortable in his own skin in a way most people never achieved. He stood in the hallway outside my apartment like he belonged there, hands relaxed at his sides, waiting with the patience of someone who knew I would eventually open the door. I should have called the police, should have grabbed the nearest weapon and barricaded myself inside. But the man on the other side of that door had pulled me from a sinking car and left me his expensive coat, had disappeared before anyone could question him. And now he was here, which meant he knew exactly where I lived despite never asking. My hand shook as I undid the chain lock, left it on, opened the door the 3 inches the chain allowed. Hannah Collins. His voice was deeper in person, rougher around the edges. He didn't make it a question. You know who I am. I do. His eyes were dark brown, nearly black in the dim hallway lighting. They tracked across my face with the same calculated assessment I'd seen in the parking lot photograph. I wanted to check if you were recovering well. How did you find my address? He glanced at the coat visible on my couch behind me. You have something of mine. Seemed reasonable to retrieve it. That doesn't answer my question. No. He tilted his head slightly. It doesn't. May I come in? This conversation would be better conducted privately. Every survival instinct I possessed screamed at me to slam the door. But standing here with 3 inches of space between us felt more dangerous. At least if he was inside, I saw what he was doing. Could grab a knife from the kitchen if necessary. Could run for the fire escape. I closed the door, undid the chain, and opened it again. Stepped back to let him enter. He moved past me with careful precision, the kind that came from being constantly aware of his own body in space. He was taller than I'd thought, maybe 6'3". His suit was different than the one in the photograph, but equally expensive. Charcoal gray with a subtle pattern I could only see when the light hit it right. No tie. Top button undone. He surveyed my apartment with the same thoroughness he'd applied to my face, taking in the second-hand furniture, the photographs covering one entire wall, the organized chaos of my work spread across every available surface. His gaze lingered on the images. You have a sharp eye, he said, moving closer to a series I'd shot, documenting homeless encampments under the Morrison Bridge. You see things most people miss. That's my job. I know. He turned to face me. Christopher Ravellini. I already knew his name from 6 hours of obsessive internet research, but hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way the articles hadn't. Christopher Ravellini, 34 years old, suspected head of the Ravellini organization that controlled most of the organized crime on the West Coast. Never arrested. Never even questioned officially. Just whispers and speculation and photographs of him at charity galas and expensive restaurants. You were at the Benson Hotel event, I said. Last week. I photographed you. You photographed a transaction you weren't supposed to see. So you know about the photos. Everyone involved knows about the photos, Hannah. That's why someone cut your brake lines. He said it so matter-of-factly, like he was discussing the weather. The men you captured on camera work for dangerous people. People who eliminate problems before they become bigger problems. And you? I crossed my arms over my chest, trying to look braver than I felt. What do? I run a business. Sometimes that business requires protecting assets. Sometimes it requires eliminating threats. His gaze held mine steadily. Right now, I'm offering to protect you. Why would I trust you? You were there. You're part of whatever that transaction was. I was observing. There's a difference. He moved to my window, looked down at the street below with casual interest. The men who want you dead work for the Cartel del Golfo. They operate distribution networks throughout Oregon and Washington under the cover of legitimate businesses. Your photographs document a $22 million transaction between them and suppliers from Mexico. If those images become public, they destroy years of carefully constructed operations. Then I'll take them to the police. Christopher turned from the window. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. 3 detectives in the Portland Police Department receive $20,000 monthly from the cartel. 2 patrol officers receive $10,000 each. A lieutenant receives $30,000. Going to the police with those photographs is a death sentence with extra steps. The casual way he listed the corruption made my stomach turn. You're lying. I'm stating facts. Facts that could save your life if you're smart enough to listen. He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen a few times, then held it out to me. Detective Aaron Mills. 17 years with Portland PD. Owns a vacation home in Bend worth $400,000 on a salary of $85,000 per year. His daughter attends private school that costs $40,000 annually. His wife drives a Mercedes. The math doesn't work unless you factor in supplemental income. I stared at the phone screen showing property records and school enrollment documents. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. This could be fabricated. It could be, but it's not. He pocketed the phone again. I'm not asking you to trust me, Hannah. I'm asking you to be realistic about your situation. Someone tried to kill you 3 days ago. They failed. They won't fail twice. So what? I let you protect me? Move into some safe house and wait for this to blow over? It won't blow over. Not until the cartel is convinced you're no longer a threat. He moved toward the door, paused with his hand on the handle. Think about it. You have my number from the coat. Call me when you're ready to accept reality. He left as quietly as he'd arrived. I stood in the middle of my apartment, shaking with anger and fear, and the horrible certainty that he was right. I spent the rest of the day researching Detective Mills. Found everything Christopher had mentioned plus more. The vacation home, the private school, the car. All on a salary that couldn't possibly support that lifestyle. I checked the other names he'd implied were on cartel payroll. Found similar patterns. Properties they couldn't afford. Lifestyles that didn't match their income. It wasn't proof exactly, but it was pattern. And patterns were what I'd built my career on recognizing. That night, I barely slept. Every sound in the building made me jump. Every car passing below my window could have been someone coming for me. By morning, I was exhausted and wired and angry at myself for being scared in my own home. I tried to work, set up my laptop in the living room and started editing photographs from a shoot 2 weeks ago. Portraits of small business owners in Northeast Portland. Safe work. Boring work. The kind that paid bills but didn't satisfy whatever had driven me into photojournalism in the first place. Around noon, I noticed the car. Gray sedan. Parked across the street with a clear view of my building's entrance. 2 men inside. They weren't trying to hide. That was worse than if they'd been attempting stealth. It meant they wanted me to know they were watching. I needed groceries. The basics. Milk, bread, coffee. Things I couldn't get delivered quickly. I told myself I was being paranoid. That the car was coincidence. That I was seeing threats where none existed because Christopher Ravellini had planted fear in my head. But when I left the building and walked toward the corner store 6 blocks away, the 2 men from the sedan followed me. They didn't bother with subtlety. just maintained a distance of maybe 20 feet, matching my pace exactly. Both Hispanic, both wearing jeans and dark jackets. One of them had his hand in his pocket in a way that suggested he was gripping something. Something gun-shaped. My heart hammered against my bruised ribs. I pulled out my phone with fingers that trembled hard enough I almost dropped it. Found Christopher's number. Texted. 2 men following me. Gray sedan. What do I do? The response came within seconds. Get inside nearest business. Stay near other people. Where are you? I typed my location. Corner of Hawthorne and 21st. 4 minutes. I ducked into a coffee shop, positioning myself near the register where the barista and 3 customers could see me clearly. The 2 men stopped outside. Didn't enter. Just stood there watching through the window like predators waiting for prey to break from cover. The barista noticed my expression. You okay? Fine. Just waiting for someone. 3.5 minutes later, a black SUV pulled up outside. Christopher emerged from the passenger side, followed by 2 men who looked like they lifted cars for fun. He approached the men from the sedan. I couldn't hear what was said, but I watched body language. Watched the 2 pursuers tense up. Watched one of them reach for his pocket before Christopher's companion moved his jacket aside enough to reveal a holster. The conversation lasted less than a minute. Then the 2 men from the sedan backed away, hands visible, and disappeared around the corner at a pace short of running. Christopher entered the coffee shop. His eyes found me immediately. Let's go. I didn't argue. Followed him to the SUV and climbed into the back seat. One of his men got behind the wheel. The other took the passenger seat. Christopher sat beside me, close enough that I could smell his cologne. Cedar and something darker. Expensive like everything else about him. What did you say to them? I asked as we pulled away from the curb. I explained that you were under my protection. That touching you would start a war their organization couldn't win. His tone suggested this was routine business. They'll report back to their superiors. Those superiors will need to decide if eliminating one photographer is worth the conflict. And if they decide it is, then there will be a war. He looked at me directly. Which is why you're going to accept my offer. Because the alternative is spending however long you have left, looking over your shoulder, waiting for someone more persistent than those 2. We drove in silence for several blocks. I watched the city pass by through tinted windows, processing the reality of my situation. Someone had tried to murder me. Had failed. Was trying again. The police couldn't help. Going public with the photographs would paint a bigger target on my back. I had exactly one option, and that option was sitting beside me radiating calm control. The photographs, I said finally. What happens to them? They stay exactly where they are. On your memory cards. In your possession. He shifted to face me more fully. I'm not interested in destroying evidence, Hannah. I'm interested in keeping you alive long enough that it stops mattering. How long is that? Depends on how quickly the cartel decides you're not worth the trouble. Could be weeks. Could be months. He paused. I have a property outside the city. Private. Secure. You'd stay there until this resolves itself. A gilded cage. A cage nonetheless, but one with walls thick enough to keep you breathing. His expression didn't change. You have options. Limited ones, but options. You can refuse my help and take your chances with the cartel. You can go to the police and hope I'm wrong about their corruption. Or you can accept that someone more powerful than you wants you dead, and the only person offering real protection is someone equally powerful. I hated that he made sense. Hated that every logical path led to the same conclusion. I thought about my parents. About how they'd raised me to be independent, self-sufficient, to never rely on anyone for safety. About how neither of them had survived to see me turn 27, killed by a drunk driver who ran a red light. About how being independent hadn't saved them. Okay, I said. My voice sounded hollow. I'll accept your protection. Temporarily. Christopher nodded once. We'll stop by your apartment. Pack what you need for a few weeks. You won't be coming back for a while. The SUV changed direction. I watched my city disappear behind us and wondered what version of myself would return when this was over, if any version of me returned at all. We didn't go back to my apartment after all. A quick call from Vincent flagged movement near my block, and Christopher pivoted the plan to retrieve my things later, when it could be done safely. We didn't drive back toward the city. Christopher directed his driver onto Highway 26 heading west, away from Portland's sprawl and into the forested hills that rose like green walls on either side of the road. I watched the landscape change through tinted windows, suburbs giving way to scattered houses, then trees and the occasional farm breaking up the wilderness. 50 minutes passed in near silence. Christopher made 2 phone calls in Italian, his voice low and controlled, discussing things I couldn't understand but could feel the weight of. Security arrangements, probably. Preparations for the house guest he'd acquired whether I liked it or not. The property appeared suddenly, set back from the main road behind gates that looked decorative, but were reinforced steel disguised as wrought iron. They swung open automatically as we approached. The driveway curved through precisely maintained landscaping, native plants arranged with the care that required professional attention. Then the house emerged from the trees. Modern architecture. All glass and dark wood and clean lines that fit the natural surroundings instead of competing with them. 2 stories, sprawling horizontally rather than building up. Solar panels on the roof. Security cameras visible at every corner, not even attempting to hide. "This is where you live?" I asked. "One of several properties I own. This one offers the most privacy." Christopher opened his door as soon as we stopped. "Come on. I'll show you where you'll be staying." I followed him inside, my duffel bag slung over one shoulder. The interior matched the exterior. Minimalist without being cold. Hardwood floors, floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of the forest. Furniture that looked comfortable and expensive in equal measure. Art on the walls that was probably worth more than my entire apartment building. He led me upstairs and down a hallway to a bedroom that was larger than my living room and bedroom combined. King-sized bed with charcoal gray bedding. A sitting area near windows that overlooked the trees. Attached bathroom visible through an open door. "You'll stay here," Christopher said. "Bathroom is stocked with everything you should need. If you require something else, let me know." I dropped my bag on the bed. Noticed immediately that there was no lock on the door. "So I'm supposed to trust that your men won't walk in whenever they feel like it. My men value their lives too much to disrespect a guest under my protection." He leaned against the doorframe, watching me explore the space. "But if it makes you feel better, you're the only woman in the house. My security team stays in the lower level or in the external buildings. They won't come up here unless there's an emergency. And you? My bedroom is at the other end of the hall. You won't see me unless you want to." He straightened. "Dinner is at 7. You're welcome to join me or I can have food sent to your room. Your choice. I'll come down." The last thing I wanted was to hide in here like I was a prisoner, no matter how nice the accommodations. Christopher nodded and left, closing the door behind him. I waited until his footsteps faded before letting myself collapse onto the edge of the bed. My ribs protested the movement, reminding me that less than a week ago I'd nearly drowned. Now I was in a stranger's house in the middle of nowhere because people wanted to murder me for accidentally photographing a drug deal. My phone had service. That surprised me. I'd half expected Christopher to confiscate it or demand I leave it behind. I scrolled through messages from friends wondering why I hadn't responded in days. From my few regular clients asking about project timelines. I couldn't tell any of them the truth. Couldn't explain where I was or why. I texted back generic excuses. Family emergency. Taking a few weeks off. We'll be in touch soon. Then I turned off my phone and shoved it in the nightstand drawer. The next 4 days blurred together in a way that made me feel disconnected from my own life. I woke early from habit, finding the house already active with Christopher's security team conducting their morning routines. I explored the property boundaries, staying within the areas Christopher had indicated were safe. Took hundreds of photographs of the forest, the way morning light filtered through Douglas fir branches, deer that wandered close enough to touch, but mostly I felt useless, inactive. I was used to working 12-hour days, chasing stories, editing until my eyes burned. Here I had nothing but time and no productive way to use it. Christopher worked from an office on the first floor. Door always closed during business hours. I caught glimpses through the window of him at a massive desk, laptop open, phone pressed to his ear, looking every inch the legitimate businessman the press sometimes tried to claim he was. But the men who came and went from that office weren't corporate executives. They moved like soldiers, spoke in low voices about things that stopped when I walked past. Evenings were different. Christopher emerged from his office at 6:30 exactly, usually wearing the same clothes but looking less formal. He'd pour 2 glasses of wine without asking if I wanted one, and settle into the living room like he expected me to join him. The first night I almost refused. Almost took my dinner upstairs and ate alone to prove I still had some control over my own choices. But curiosity won. I wanted to understand the man who'd saved my life, and then essentially kidnapped me for my own protection. "You read," I said that first evening, noting the book on the side table next to his chair. Cormac McCarthy, Blood Meridian. Is that surprising? Most people don't choose that particular book for light reading. I'd tried it once. Given up after 50 pages of unrelenting violence described in prose that was beautiful and horrifying simultaneously. Most people don't live the life where that violence feels familiar. He picked up the book, considered it. McCarthy understood something important. That brutality is part of the human condition. We dress it up in different clothes depending on the century. That's a depressing worldview. It's an honest one. He set the book down and looked at me directly. "You photograph the world as it exists, Hannah. Homeless camps, police violence, the ugliness people prefer to ignore. You understand the same thing McCarthy did." I didn't have an answer for that. He was right. And I hated that he was right. The conversations evolved. Second night, we talked about music. He played jazz from a sound system that probably cost more than my car had, explaining the history of particular recordings, the techniques that made Charlie Parker revolutionary. Third night, he cooked. An elaborate pasta dish that required 2 hours of preparation and tasted better than anything I'd eaten in months. He moved around the kitchen with the same controlled precision he applied to everything else, measuring and timing each element perfectly. "Where did you learn to cook?" I asked, watching him plate the food with care that bordered on obsessive. "My grandmother. She insisted every man in the family know how to feed himself properly." He handed me a plate. "She said depending on others for basic survival was weakness." Sounds like a hard woman. She survived poverty in Naples and built a life in a country that didn't want her. Hard doesn't begin to cover it. He sat across from me at the dining table. "She died when I was 16. Lung cancer from 40 years of smoking. Refused treatment because she said the money was better spent on my education." There was emotion underneath the words, carefully controlled but present. I saw glimpses of the person he might have been in a different life. Someone who read literature and cooked elaborate meals and mourned his grandmother. But then his phone would ring, and I'd hear him switch to Italian, his voice dropping into tones that promised consequences. Or I'd notice the scars across his knuckles, old and white and deliberate. Or catch him checking the gun he kept in a holster under his jacket, a motion so automatic he probably didn't realize he was doing it. Christopher Ravellini was a contradiction wrapped in expensive clothes and dangerous capability. And despite every logical reason I had to maintain distance, I found myself wanting to understand him. A week after I arrived, everything shifted. I was in the living room editing photos on my laptop when Christopher emerged from his office, moving faster than I'd seen him move before. His expression was locked down tight, but tension radiated from him. "We have a situation," he said. "The cartel knows you're not at your apartment anymore. They're trying to locate which properties I own that could house a guest." My stomach dropped. "How long do we have? Best estimate?" 2 hours before they narrow down the possibilities. He pulled out his phone, typed rapidly. "I'm bringing in additional security. We're going to lock this place down. Shouldn't we leave? Go somewhere else? And lead them directly there?" "No." He moved to the windows, scanning the tree line like he expected attackers to materialize from the forest. "This property is defensible. Moving puts us vulnerable during transport. We stay." I watched him coordinate over the next hour. 10 men arrived in 3 vehicles, all of them armed with rifles I recognized from photographs I'd taken at police training exercises. Not handguns for close quarters, weapons designed for distance and stopping power. They dispersed around the property, taking positions that covered every approach. Christopher activated security systems I hadn't known existed. Motion sensors, cameras with thermal imaging, pressure plates in the driveway. The house transformed from comfortable residence to military installation. He found me in the kitchen where I'd retreated when the armed men became too much. If shooting starts, you go upstairs to your room. Lock yourself in the bathroom. It's reinforced. Stay there until I come get you personally. Understand? What if you don't come? Then my second-in-command, Vincent, will come instead. He knows to extract you if I'm incapacitated. Christopher gripped my shoulder briefly. But I won't be. I've survived worse than the Cartel del Golfo sending thugs after a photographer. The hours crawled past. I sat upstairs in my room, unable to focus on anything except the waiting. Every sound could have been the attack starting. Every creak of the house settling made my heart race. I'd never felt so helpless, so dependent on someone else for survival. But the attack never came. Christopher appeared in my doorway at midnight. It's over. Stand down. What happened? It was a test. Someone in my organization has been feeding information to the cartel. I planted false intelligence about when you'd be vulnerable, then watched to see who passed it along. His expression was cold in a way I hadn't seen before. 2 men. They've been removed from my employment. Permanently. I understood what permanently meant. You killed them. I eliminated a threat to my operation and to you. He said it without inflection. Statement of fact. They made their choice when they accepted cartel money. This was the consequence. He left before I could respond. I sat on my bed, hands shaking, processing the reality of who I'd accepted protection from. Christopher wasn't connected to organized crime. He ran it, made decisions about who lived and died, ordered executions with the same calm efficiency he used for everything else. I should have been horrified, should have demanded to leave immediately, but instead I felt something closer to relief that he was competent enough to keep me alive in this world I'd stumbled into, something I didn't want to examine too closely. 2 weeks dissolved into a rhythm that felt both comfortable and dangerous. Christopher and I circled each other like satellites locked in orbit, maintaining careful distance even as gravity pulled us closer. Morning coffee became an unspoken routine. He'd brew it exactly how I liked it without asking. 3/4 full with cream but no sugar. I'd find him in the living room reading reports, and we'd sit in companionable silence while dawn crept through the windows. But the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was loaded with all the things neither of us said. The way his gaze lingered on my mouth when I spoke. How my pulse jumped when his hand brushed mine, reaching for the same book. The deliberate space he maintained between us on the couch, like he didn't trust himself to sit closer. I caught him watching me photograph the property one afternoon, standing at the window of his office with an expression I couldn't decipher. When I looked up and met his eyes, he didn't look away, just held my gaze for 3 heartbeats before returning to his desk. That night at dinner, his knee bumped mine under the table. Neither of us moved away. I need to attend a family obligation this Saturday, Christopher said on Thursday evening. We were in the kitchen. He was cooking again, some elaborate risotto that required constant attention. Weekly dinner with my sister. It would be helpful if you accompanied me. I set down the wine glass I'd been nursing. You have a sister, Lucia, 26. She's a corporate attorney who handles the legitimate side of my business interests. He stirred the rice with methodical precision. She knows about your situation, about the photographs and the cartel. I trust her completely. And do you want me to meet her because sitting out here indefinitely isn't sustainable. You need interaction with people who aren't my security team. And because maintaining normal routines is important for appearances. The cartel watches for patterns. If I suddenly stop attending family dinners, it signals that something has changed. He had a point. I'd been isolated for 2 weeks, seeing no one except Christopher and the rotating shifts of armed men who patrolled the property. My friends had stopped asking when I'd be back. My clients had moved on to other photographers. I was disappearing from my own life one day at a time. Okay, I agreed. I'll go. Saturday arrived overcast and cold. Christopher drove us himself in a different vehicle than the SUV from my first day here. A Mercedes sedan, black with leather interior that smelled new. He wore charcoal slacks and a dark gray sweater that probably cost more than my monthly rent used to. I'd chosen jeans and a forest green blouse, the nicest clothes I'd packed when leaving my apartment. The drive took 45 minutes, winding back through the hills toward Portland proper. We didn't talk much. Christopher seemed tense in a way I hadn't seen before. His hands gripped the steering wheel harder than necessary. His jaw was set. "Nervous about me meeting your sister?" I asked. "Lucia can be perceptive. She'll notice things I'd prefer she didn't." "What kinds of things?" He glanced at me briefly. "That I'm struggling to maintain appropriate boundaries with someone under my protection." The admission hung in the air between us. I didn't know how to respond, so I watched the scenery change from forest to suburbs to the elegant neighborhoods of Northwest Portland, where old money-built craftsman homes on tree-lined streets. Lucia's townhouse stood in the Pearl District, modern architecture sandwiched between renovated warehouses turned luxury condos. Christopher parked on the street and came around to open my door before I could do it myself. A small gesture that felt significant. The woman who answered the door was unmistakably his sister. Same dark hair, though hers fell in waves past her shoulders. Same intense brown eyes that assessed me in 2 seconds flat. But where Christopher's expressions were guarded, hers were open. She smiled genuinely and pulled her brother into a hug that he returned with obvious affection. "You must be Hannah." Lucia extended her hand to me. Her grip was firm. "I'm so glad you could come. Christopher's been impossible to pin down lately." "I've been managing a situation," Christopher said. "You're always managing a situation." She stepped aside to let us enter. "Come in. Dinner's almost ready." The interior matched the exterior. Clean lines, modern furniture, art that looked expensive but not ostentatious. Everything arranged with the precision of someone who valued order. A lawyer's home, I thought. Someone who built arguments and constructed defenses and kept things carefully controlled. Lucia poured wine while Christopher checked his phone in the living room. She handed me a glass of red that was probably worth more than I wanted to know. "He told me about the photographs," she said quietly. "About what you accidentally captured. I'm sorry you got pulled into this. I'm sorry I took pictures of your family's business associates conducting illegal transactions." She laughed, a sound that was warm and genuine. "Christopher doesn't have business associates. He has allies and enemies and people who haven't decided which category they belong in yet." She glanced toward where her brother stood with his back to us. "But he's good at what he does. If anyone can keep you safe from the Cartel del Golfo, it's him." Dinner was chicken picada with roasted vegetables and homemade bread that Lucia admitted came from the bakery down the street. We sat at a table that fit 6, but felt intimate with the 3 of us. Christopher relaxed as the meal progressed, the tension bleeding from his shoulders as he and Lucia traded stories about their grandmother, who'd apparently been a force of nature. "She used to make us recite poetry in Italian," Lucia said. "Dante mostly. If we couldn't remember the lines, no dessert." "You always remembered," Christopher pointed out. "Because I cheated. I wrote the lines on my arm and hid them under my sleeve." She grinned at me. "He never told on me either. Too honorable for his own good. Even as a kid, I watched them together, seeing a different version of Christopher. Someone who had family he loved, who'd been a child once, before whatever had happened to turn him into the man who ordered executions and ran criminal enterprises. It made him more human, more complicated. After dinner, Christopher's phone rang. He excused himself to the balcony, leaving Lucia and me alone with coffee and tiramisu she'd made from scratch. "He likes you," Lucia said without preamble. "I can tell. We barely know each other. My brother doesn't bring women to family dinners. Ever. The last time he did that, I was 20 years old." She stirred her coffee thoughtfully. Her name was Natasha. They were together for 3 years. She was an architect, brilliant, beautiful, kind in ways that surprised me, given the world Christopher operates in. I didn't want to ask, but the question came anyway. "What happened to her?" "The cartel happened. Not this cartel specifically. A different organization that wanted to send Christopher a message about territorial disputes." Lucia's expression hardened. "They killed her in her own office. Made it look like a robbery gone wrong. But everyone knew what it was." My stomach twisted. "When?" 6 years ago. Christopher blamed himself for getting her involved in his life, for not keeping her safe. He shut down completely after that. Just work. No relationships, no connections beyond family and business. She looked at me directly. "Until you. I'm not trying to replace anyone." "I know." And I think he knows that too, which is why he's terrified. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand briefly. Just be patient with him. Whatever walls he's built, they're there for reasons that made sense at the time, even if they don't serve him anymore. Christopher returned before I could respond. He read something in Lucia's expression and frowned. What did you tell her? Things she deserved to know. Lucia stood and started clearing plates. Don't give me that look. She's not stupid, Chris. She was going to figure it out eventually. The drive back to the property was quiet for the first 15 minutes. Then I broke the silence. Lucia told me about Natasha. Christopher's jaw tightened. I thought she might. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to. No. You should know. He stared at the road ahead, hands gripping the wheel. We met at a gallery opening. She was designing a renovation for the building next door. We talked for 3 hours. She knew what I was, what I did. Didn't care. Said everyone had darkness in their history. Hers was less visible than mine. He was silent for a long moment. Then, we planned to leave. She had job offers in Chicago. I was arranging to transfer control of my operations to my second-in-command. We were going to start over somewhere no one knew our names. What stopped you? The Cartel del Golfo found out. Saw it as weakness. An opportunity to strike when I was distracted by personal matters. His voice went flat. They killed her in broad daylight. Waited until I was in a meeting I couldn't leave without raising suspicion. Made sure I'd know exactly why she died. I'm sorry. I killed 14 of them over the next 6 months. Systematically. Methodically. Until their leadership sued for peace and paid reparations. He glanced at me briefly. That's who I am, Hannah. Someone who responds to loss with calculated violence. Someone who runs an organization built on fear and control. You should understand that before this goes any further. I already know who you are. I reached over and placed my hand over his on the gearshift. His skin was warm. You pulled me out of a river when you could have left me to drown. You cook elaborate meals and read McCarthy and protect the people you care about with everything you have. Yes, you're dangerous. Yes, you've done terrible things. But you're also more than those things. We pulled into the driveway. The gates closed behind us automatically. Christopher killed the engine but didn't move to get out. He turned to face me fully, his expression raw in a way I'd never seen. I can't promise to keep you safe forever. Can't promise the cartel won't find a way through my defenses. Can't promise I won't get you killed the way I got Natasha killed. I'm not asking for promises. I unbuckled my seatbelt. I'm asking you to stop pretending you don't feel what I know you feel. He moved before I could process the decision forming in his eyes. His hand cupped the back of my neck, pulling me across the center console. His mouth found mine with an intensity that stole my breath. The kiss was desperate, fierce. Years of isolation and grief and denied connection breaking through every wall he'd built. I kissed him back as fiercely, my fingers tangling in his hair, pulling him closer despite the awkward angle and the gear shift digging into my hip. He tasted like coffee and something darker, something that should have scared me but made me want more. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. His forehead rested against mine. This is a mistake, he said. Probably. It puts you in more danger. I'm already in danger. It changes everything. Good. I kissed him again, softer this time. I was getting tired of pretending too. We stayed in the car for another 10 minutes, kissing like teenagers who'd discovered what their bodies were capable of. When we finally made it inside, Christopher's security team tactfully pretended not to notice our disheveled appearance or the way we couldn't stop touching each other. That night, everything changed. 3 weeks after that first kiss, I woke up in Christopher's bed for the 5th morning in a row. His arm was draped across my waist, his breathing slow and even against my shoulder. Morning light filtered through the curtains, painting everything in shades of gold. For a moment, I could pretend we were normal people, just a couple waking up together without the weight of organized crime and murder attempts hanging over us. Then my phone buzzed on the nightstand. Reality reasserted itself. Christopher stirred, pressing a kiss to my bare shoulder before releasing me. What time is it? 7:30. I grabbed my phone. A text from Lucia asking if we wanted to come to dinner next week. Your sister wants to feed us again. She's convinced you're not eating properly. He sat up, the sheets pooling around his waist. Even half asleep and disheveled, He was striking. Tell her we'll be there. I replied to Lucia, while Christopher disappeared into the bathroom. The shower started. I considered joining him, but decided against it. We'd spent most of yesterday afternoon tangled together, making up for the weeks of denial. My body needed recovery time, even if my mind wanted more of him. Instead, I went to my own room and dressed in jeans and a thermal shirt, pulled my hair into a ponytail, made myself look like someone prepared to work instead of someone who'd spent the night thoroughly distracted. Downstairs, I found Vincent in the kitchen making coffee. Christopher's second-in-command was 42, built like he lifted trucks for entertainment, with graying hair and eyes that missed nothing. He'd been professional but distant since my arrival. This morning he nodded at me. "Morning, Miss Collins." "Hannah." I poured myself coffee from the pot he'd brewed. "We've been living in the same house for 3 weeks. You can use my first name. Hannah, then." He added cream to his own mug. "Boss seems different lately. Lighter. That's good." I wasn't sure how to respond to that, so I nodded. Vincent took his coffee and headed toward Christopher's office, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I needed to do something productive. Needed to feel useful instead of protected. For weeks I'd been passive, letting Christopher handle everything while I hid in his house taking photographs of trees. It was driving me slowly insane. The idea hit me while scrolling through old work on my laptop. I had skills the cartel didn't know about. Experience documenting things people wanted hidden. Connecting evidence across multiple sources. Building cases through visual storytelling. When Christopher emerged from his office for lunch, I ambushed him with my proposal. "I need equipment from my apartment," I said without preamble. "My telephoto lenses, the professional tripod, the portable lighting kit." He looked up from the sandwich he was assembling. "Why?" "Because I want to help actively. Document cartel operations. Build a case we can feed to the FBI anonymously." I set my laptop on the counter, showing him examples of investigative photojournalism I'd done before. "This is what I do, Christopher. I find stories people don't want told and I tell them anyway. Let me do that here." "No." He said it flatly, without room for negotiation. "Your apartment is being watched. Going back is suicide. Then we plan it properly. Go at night. Bring backup. Make it quick." I heard the desperation in my voice. I can't sit here indefinitely waiting for this to resolve itself. I need to fight back. Christopher studied me for a long moment. I watched him process arguments, calculate risks, weigh options. Finally, he sighed. "If we do this, it's planned to the minute. Full team, multiple exit strategies. And if anything goes wrong, we abort immediately." Agreed. He spent the afternoon coordinating with Vincent and 4 other men I'd seen around the property but never talked to. They spread maps across the dining room table, marking routes and timing. Christopher insisted on 5 different escape paths depending on which direction trouble came from. Overkill, I thought, but didn't argue. We left at 2:45 in the morning. 3 vehicles, 6 armed men, and me wearing dark clothes with my hair tucked under a baseball cap. The drive into Portland took an hour through empty roads. My neighborhood looked different at this hour. Darker. More threatening. 2 of Christopher's men swept the building first, came back reporting minimal cartel surveillance. 1 car parked 3 blocks away with sleeping occupants. We had a window. 12 minutes, Christopher said as we approached my apartment door. In and out. No stopping for anything that's not on the list. My hands shook as I unlocked the door. Everything looked exactly as I'd left it almost a month ago. Coffee mug in the sink, laundry basket on the couch, photographs covering the walls. But it felt like someone else's life now. Like I was breaking into a museum of who I used to be. "Hannah?" Christopher touched my elbow. "Focus." "Right." I moved to my equipment closet and started grabbing what I needed. 2 telephoto lenses, the tripod, a bag of memory cards and batteries. Christopher helped me pack everything into a duffel bag while his men stood guard at the door and windows. 10 minutes. We were ahead of schedule. I couldn't help it. I grabbed a framed photograph from the bookshelf. My parents at their anniversary dinner 2 months before they died. The only decent picture I had of them together. Shoved it in the bag. "Time," Vincent called from the doorway. "We need to move." We left everything else behind. The furniture I'd saved for months to buy. The darkroom equipment in the spare bedroom. books and clothes and the accumulated debris of 29 years. Out the door and down the stairs and into the waiting vehicles in under 12 minutes total. The explosion happened when we were halfway back to the property. A flash of light behind us so bright it turned night into day. Then the sound, a deep boom that rattled the SUV's windows. I twisted in my seat to look back. Flames lit up the sky where my building had been, orange and red reaching toward the clouds, black smoke already billowing. Jesus Christ, Vincent breathed from the driver's seat. Christopher had his phone out, already making calls. Get units to that location, find out casualty count, and check if anyone's following us. Now. My ears were ringing. Not from the explosion itself. We were too far away for that, but from shock. If we'd been 10 minutes slower, if I'd stopped to grab more things, if Christopher hadn't been so insistent about timing. They were waiting, I said. My voice sounded distant. They knew I'd eventually come back. Remote detonation. Christopher's expression was carved from stone. Someone was watching, saw us go in, waited to be sure you were inside before triggering it, but we left early, which is the only reason you're alive. He reached over and gripped my hand hard enough to hurt. They wanted to be certain this time. No surviving a sinking car. Just complete obliteration. Back at the property, I couldn't sit still. Paced the living room, while Christopher's team reviewed security footage and coordinated with contacts in the Portland Fire Department. The final report came through at dawn. 3 people killed in the blast. 2 neighbors who'd been awake watching television. One of Christopher's own surveillance team who'd been staged nearby as an early warning system. I made it to the bathroom before I threw up. Knelt on the cold tile and emptied my stomach until there was nothing left. Christopher found me there, wiped my face with a damp cloth, and carried me to his bed without saying a word. I didn't sleep, just stared at the ceiling while rage slowly replaced shock. 3 people were dead because of photographs I'd taken. My building was rubble. Everything I'd owned, except what fit in a duffel bag, was destroyed. The Cartel del Golfo wanted me afraid, wanted me running, wanted me dependent on Christopher's protection until they found a way through his defenses. Instead, they'd made me furious. By noon, I was in Christopher's office with my laptop and the equipment we'd recovered. "I'm doing this," I said. "I'm going after them." He looked up from the phone call he was finishing. Told whoever was on the other end he'd call back. "Explain. You said you have contacts in the FBI. Clean ones. People not on the cartel payroll." I pulled up satellite images of Portland I'd been studying. "I'm going to document everything. Their operations, their people, their transactions. Build a case so airtight the FBI can't ignore it. And then I'm going to hand it to them on a silver platter and watch the cartel burn. That puts you directly in their crosshairs. I'm already there. They blew up my building." I met his eyes. "I can sit here passively waiting to die, or I can fight back with the only weapons I have. My camera and my brain. Your choice which version of me you want to protect." Christopher was silent for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone and made a call. "Vincent, get the technical team together. We have a project." The next 3 weeks were the most intense of my life. Christopher set me up in a room adjacent to his office with equipment I'd only dreamed about having access to. High-powered cameras with lenses that could read license plates from a mile away. Surveillance software that let me track movement patterns across multiple locations. Databases of known cartel associates compiled from years of Christopher's intelligence gathering. I worked 12-hour days, sometimes more, analyzing photographs Vincent's team provided, identifying patterns in vehicle movements, mapping supply chains. Every piece of evidence I found, I documented meticulously. Names, dates, locations, building the comprehensive picture that prosecutors loved. Christopher's team intercepted communications, told me what to look for and when. I'd position cameras in places they identified and wait, sometimes for hours, sometimes overnight, capturing transactions, meetings, shipments being moved under cover of legitimate business. My journalistic training finally had purpose again. I knew how to take disparate pieces of information and weave them into coherent narrative, how to present evidence that couldn't be dismissed, how to tell a story that demanded action. Lucia came for dinner one evening and found me hunched over my laptop at the dining room table, surrounded by printed photographs and handwritten notes. She looked at the organized chaos and then at her brother. "She's like you," Lucia said. "Obsessive when she finds a problem to solve." "I'm starting to notice that," Christopher replied, but there was pride in his voice. After 2 weeks, I had something substantial. A major distribution operation happening in 9 days. $30 million worth of product moving through the port of Seattle. I'd identified the warehouse where it would be staged, the vehicles transporting it, the personnel involved, even the approximate timing based on ship manifests and previous patterns. Christopher reviewed my work with Vincent. They spent 3 hours verifying details, checking sources, making sure nothing could be traced back to how we obtained the information. Finally, Christopher nodded. "This is solid work, Hannah. Better than what we usually get from paid informants." "So we use it?" "We use it." He pulled out a burner phone I'd never seen before. "I have a contact at the FBI. Agent Sarah Morrison. She works organized crime out of Seattle. Clean record. Not on anyone's payroll that I've been able to determine. I've fed her information before through anonymous channels. She knows how to handle sensitive intelligence." He composed a message carefully. "Encrypted. Untraceable if Morrison followed protocols correctly. Attached the files I'd compiled with all identifying information about Christopher's organization stripped away. Sent it. How long until we know if she acts on it?" I asked. "Could be days. Could be weeks. Federal investigations move slowly." He pulled me against him, wrapping his arms around my waist. "But you did good work. Real work. No matter what happens next, you should be proud of that." I leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. 3 people had died in that explosion meant for me. But maybe, if this worked, we could prevent more deaths. Could put pressure on the cartel from enough sides that they'd decide one photographer wasn't worth the trouble. Maybe I could finally stop running and start living again. Agent Morrison moved fast. 4 days after Christopher sent the intelligence, news broke of a massive federal raid at the port of Seattle. I watched the coverage on 3 different channels simultaneously, heart pounding as helicopters showed tactical teams swarming a warehouse I'd photographed from 6 different angles. 23 arrests, 2 regional lieutenants for the Cartel del Golfo among them, 55 million in heroin and cocaine seized, 42 million in cash confiscated. The news anchors called it the biggest organized crime bust in Pacific Northwest history. They speculated about anonymous tips and months of federal investigation. I knew the truth. My photographs had done that. My analysis of movement patterns and shipping manifests had given Morrison everything she needed to execute a perfect operation. Christopher found me glued to the television at noon, tears streaming down my face. Not sad tears, vindication, relief. 3 people had died in the explosion meant for me. But now, dozens of cartel operatives were in federal custody facing decades in prison. The organization that wanted me dead had lost millions in product and cash, plus key leadership. "You did good work," Christopher said, sitting beside me on the couch. "Real damage. The kind that takes years to recover from. It's not over, though. They'll still want revenge. Maybe. But they've got bigger problems now than one photographer." He turned off the television. "The FBI will be tearing apart everything they seized, following money trails, flipping lower-level dealers for information. The cartel's entire West Coast operation is compromised. They'll be focused on damage control and keeping their remaining people from turning federal witness." I wanted to believe him. Wanted to think that maybe, finally, I could stop looking over my shoulder. But 3 months of running had taught me not to trust peace. That evening, Christopher did something unexpected. He took me to a part of the house I'd never entered, a door off his office that he kept locked. Inside was a study that looked frozen in time. Mahogany desk worn smooth by decades of use. Leather chair with depression from whoever sat there most. Bookshelves lined with volumes in Italian and English. Photographs covering one wall, showing generations of stern-faced men in suits. "My father's office," Christopher said. "He died at that desk 5 years ago. Heart attack." I found him still holding a pen. The room felt sacred, like a museum dedicated to someone important. Christopher moved to the bookshelf and pulled down leather-bound journals. Set them on the desk with reverent care. Family history. 4 generations documented. Every decision, every alliance, every war. He opened one at random, showing pages of precise handwriting in Italian. My great-grandfather started this tradition. Said if we didn't record our own history, others would write it for us incorrectly. I traced my fingers over the writing. Can you read it? Every word. My father made sure I spoke Italian before English. Said forgetting our language was forgetting our blood. He closed the journal. He also said this life was a cage, that each generation inherited chains our ancestors forged, that real freedom was impossible once you took the oath. But you don't believe that. I want not to believe it. He leaned against the desk, arms crossed. I've spent 5 years running an organization I never wanted, maintaining alliances my father built, fighting wars that started before I was born, all because of legacy and loyalty and codes that govern a world most people don't know exists. Then why not leave? Because 300 families depend on my organization for income. Because rival groups would fill the power vacuum if I disappeared, and they're far more violent than we are. Because walking away means abandoning people who've been loyal to my family for decades. He looked at me directly. But I've been working on a different solution. Gradual transition. Transferring control of problematic operations to trusted lieutenants. Investing heavily in completely legitimate businesses. Creating distance between myself and anything that could result in federal prosecution. How long would that take? 3 years, maybe 4. Slow enough that it doesn't create instability. Fast enough that I might escape before I'm 40. He moved closer to me. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand what you'd be signing up for. If you stay with me, it's years of living in this world, meeting dangerous people, attending family dinners where half the guests are criminals, knowing where the money comes from even as I try to legitimize it. I met his gaze steadily. Are you asking if I'll wait? If I'll build that future with you? I'm asking if you can accept who I am right now, not who I want to become. I thought about it. Christopher Ravellini was a criminal. He ran an organization that profited from vice and violence. He'd ordered people killed, would probably order more killed before this was over. By any objective measure, I should run as far and fast as possible. But he'd also saved my life, protected me when he could have left me to the cartel, trusted me with his plans and his vulnerabilities, made me feel safer than I'd felt since my parents died. And somewhere in the past 3 months, I'd fallen completely in love with him. Yes, I said. I'll stay. I'll wait. I'll build whatever future we can carve out of this. He kissed me then, slow and deep and full of promise. When we finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine. I love you, he said. 3 words that clearly cost him effort to speak. I didn't think I felt this again after Natasha. Didn't want to risk it, but you make me want to try. I love you too. I wrapped my arms around his neck. All of you. Not the parts that are easy to love. The following weeks felt different. Lighter, despite nothing external changing. Christopher and I settled into routines that felt domestic and normal. Morning coffee together. Working in adjacent rooms during the day. Dinners where we talked about books and music instead of threats and violence. Lucia visited twice a week, bringing wine and gossip about her law firm and questions about what I'd do once this was over. She and I had become genuinely close. She taught me about the legal structures that protected Christopher's legitimate businesses, how to spot money laundering hidden in layers of corporate ownership, which investments were clean and which were carefully disguised criminal proceeds. You're good at this, she said one evening while we reviewed financial documents for a real estate development Christopher was considering. You see patterns, connect things most people miss. It's photojournalism applied differently, finding the story beneath the surface. Still, Chris is lucky to have you. She refilled our wine glasses, and I'm glad he finally found someone who doesn't run when things get complicated. Christopher also made changes because of me. Started introducing me to parts of his operation I'd been sheltered from. One Saturday evening, he brought me to a meeting with his senior counsel, 5 men who'd served his father and now served him. They gathered in the dining room like board members at a corporate meeting, except the business they discussed involved territory and enforcement and managing relationships with suppliers who shipped product from overseas. I sat beside Christopher, acutely aware that I was the only woman in the room, that these men had spent decades in an organization where women were wives and daughters but never equals. Vincent was there, his presence reassuring. The others I recognized from around the property but had never formally met. Christopher introduced me without preamble. "This is Hannah Collins. She's under my personal protection and has contributed intelligence that resulted in significant damage to the Cartel del Golfo. Going forward, she has authority to speak on matters of security and operations when I'm unavailable." Questions? The oldest of the 5, a man called Joseph with white hair and hard eyes, studied me openly. "With respect, boss, this woman is a civilian, an outsider. Giving her authority undermines decades of protocol. Protocol changes when circumstances require it." Christopher's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "Hannah stays. Her authority stands. Anyone who has a problem with that can voice it now or accept it going forward." Silence. Joseph clearly wanted to argue further. But Vincent leaned forward slightly, a subtle show of support for Christopher's decision. The others followed Vincent's lead. Whatever objections they had, they kept them behind their teeth. The meeting continued. I mostly listened, absorbing how they spoke in code, how shipments meant drugs, contracts meant enforcement actions, negotiations meant territory disputes. Christopher directed conversation with the same competence he applied to everything. These men might not like me, but they followed him without question. Afterward, alone in Christopher's bedroom, I asked if he thought I'd gained their acceptance. "Some of them will come around. Joseph is old school. He'll never fully trust you." Christopher unbuttoned his shirt, tossing it toward the laundry hamper. "But they respect strength and competence. You demonstrate both consistently. Eventually that matters more than their prejudices." I moved behind him, wrapping my arms around his waist. "And if they don't come around, then they're welcome to find employment elsewhere." He turned to face me, cupping my face in his hands. "You're not going anywhere. They'll adapt or leave. Those are the only options." That night, lying in darkness with Christopher's breathing steady beside me, I thought about how completely my life had changed. 4 months ago, I'd been drowning in a river. Now I was planning a future with a man who ran organized crime and introducing myself to his council of advisors like it was a normal Tuesday. My parents would have been horrified, or maybe they would have understood that sometimes survival means adapting to circumstances beyond your control, that sometimes love finds you in the least expected places and asks you to become someone you never imagined being. I didn't have answers. Just Christopher's arm draped across my waist, and the knowledge that whatever came next, we'd face it together. Peace lasted exactly 2 weeks after the Seattle raid. Then the Cartel del Golfo responded with the coordinated brutality that reminded everyone why they'd built an empire on fear. The warning came through Christopher's intelligence network at 6 p.m. on a Thursday. Multiple sources reporting unusual movement. Cartel operatives converging on Oregon from California and Washington. Not the usual distribution crews. These were enforcers, soldiers, the kind who specialized in sending messages written in blood. Christopher called an emergency meeting in his office. Vincent and 3 senior lieutenants gathered around the desk covered in maps and surveillance photos. I stood near the window, watching the sun disappear behind the trees, feeling the tension coil through the room like a living thing. "They're coming here," Vincent said, tapping a satellite image of our property. "Best intelligence suggests tonight, 20 to 30 men, military-grade weapons. This isn't reconnaissance, it's an execution squad. Let them come." Christopher's voice was cold steel. "We've prepared for this. Every approach is covered. We have higher ground and home advantage. If they want war, we'll give them war." I'd organized a small dinner for tonight, just Lucia and 2 couples Christopher had introduced me to over recent weeks. Antonio and Marie, who ran legitimate importing businesses that also served as Christopher's eyes on shipping routes. David and Sarah, whose construction company had built half the security infrastructure on this property. Normal people who lived in Christopher's world by choice, rather than force. "Cancel the dinner," I said. "No." Christopher looked at me directly. Canceling signals that we're afraid, that we're disrupting our lives because they made threats. We proceed exactly as planned. but everyone stays in the reinforced areas once shooting starts. The guests arrived at 7:30, unaware of what intelligence suggested was coming. Lucia hugged me in the foyer, carrying wine and homemade focaccia. She whispered in my ear, "Chris told me. I'm staying. You'll need help keeping the civilians calm." Dinner was surreal. We sat around the table eating pasta Christopher had prepared that morning, drinking wine, talking about renovations Antonio and Marie were planning for their beach house. All while armed men positioned themselves throughout the property. All while Christopher's phone buzzed constantly with updates he checked with casual glances. I caught his eye across the table. He gave the smallest nod. Still coming. Still on schedule. The alarms triggered at 9:15 p.m., mid-dessert. The sound was deafening. Piercing shrieks from every speaker in the house, accompanied by flashing red lights. Antonio dropped his fork. Sarah gasped. Christopher was already moving, pulling his gun from the holster under his jacket. "Everyone to the bunker. Now." His voice cut through the chaos with absolute authority. "Vincent, take point. Hannah, Lucia, get them downstairs." The first explosion shook the entire structure. Windows rattled. Dust fell from the ceiling. Through the dining room window, I saw flames erupting from the main gate. Another explosion from the eastern perimeter. They were breaching multiple points simultaneously, overwhelming our defenses through sheer numbers. Gunfire erupted, automatic weapons tearing through the night. Christopher's men returning fire from defensive positions, shouting in English and Spanish. The sharp crack of rifles, the deeper boom of shotguns at close range. Lucia grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her toward the basement entrance. Vincent led Antonio and Marie, his gun drawn, checking corners. David followed, looking pale but moving fast. I should have gone with them. Should have followed Christopher's orders and hidden in the reinforced bunker like a good civilian. But I'd spent 3 months being protected. Being passive. Letting Christopher and his men fight while I cowered. Not tonight. I turned back toward the living room. Christopher saw me, his expression shifting to fury and fear in equal measure. "Hannah, get downstairs now." "No." I grabbed the handgun he'd taught me to use from the safe in his office, made sure the safety was off, checked the magazine like he'd shown me. "I'm not hiding anymore. You're going to get yourself killed. Then I'll die fighting instead of waiting." I moved to the reinforced position near the staircase leading down. "Lucia and I will cover the bunker entrance. You focus on keeping them outside." He wanted to argue. I saw it in every line of his body. But another explosion rocked the house. Glass shattered in the kitchen. Men were breaching the first floor. He didn't have time for this. "Stay low. Don't take unnecessary risks." He pressed his forehead to mine for 1 second. "I love you. I love you too. Now go." He disappeared toward the sound of breaking glass. Lucia appeared at my elbow, also armed, her expression set with the same determination I felt. Antonio had given her the gun he'd been carrying. She checked it professionally. "We hold here," she said. "Anyone who's not Christopher's people comes down those stairs, we shoot." The fighting intensified. I heard Christopher's voice above the gunfire, commanding his men, coordinating defense. The cartel had numbers, but Christopher's team had preparation and position. Every approach had been planned for, every angle covered. Then I saw them, 3 men forcing their way through the kitchen toward the basement stairs. Not Christopher's people. Faces I didn't recognize. Guns raised, moving with military precision. "Contact," Lucia said calmly beside me. We fired simultaneously. The sound in the enclosed stairwell was deafening. My first shot went wide. My second caught the lead man in the shoulder. He spun, dropped. Lucia's shooting was better. 2 shots. Center mass. The second man fell. The third retreated, shouting in Spanish. More gunfire from above. Someone was screaming. I couldn't tell if it was Christopher's man or theirs. My hands were shaking. I'd shot someone. Maybe killed them. The adrenaline made everything feel distant and immediate at once. Lucia reloaded her weapon with steady hands. She'd done this before, I realized. This wasn't her first gunfight. "Hold position," she said. "Don't let them get past us." The battle lasted 18 minutes that felt like 18 hours. Wave after wave of cartel soldiers trying to breach. Christopher's men holding them back through superior positioning and sheer determination. I fired 4 more times, hit twice. My ears rang so badly I could barely hear anything except a high-pitched whine. Then reinforcements arrived. Christopher's teams from 2 neighboring properties, converging from behind the cartel's position, caught them in crossfire. The tide turned fast after that. The remaining attackers broke and ran, scrambling back toward whatever vehicles they'd brought. Christopher's men pursued, cutting them down as they fled. Silence crashed over the property. Not real silence. Alarms were still blaring. Men were shouting. Someone was crying. But the gunfire had stopped. The explosions had ceased. Christopher appeared at the top of the stairs, covered in blood and cordite residue. His eyes found mine immediately. He crossed the distance and pulled me against him hard enough to hurt. "You're insane," he said into my hair. Completely insane. I know. I was shaking so hard my teeth chattered. But I wasn't going to hide. He looked at Lucia. "You okay?" 3 kills confirmed. No injuries. She sounded clinical. Professional. "The civilians are secure in the bunker. Unharmed. The aftermath took hours. 9 cartel soldiers dead. 3 of Christopher's men killed. 5 wounded. 2 critically." The property looked like a war zone. Bullet holes in every surface. Windows shattered. Scorch marks from explosions. Blood on the marble floors I'd walked across 1,000 times. But we'd survived. Held them off. Sent a message that attacking Christopher Ravellini's home wasn't the easy victory they'd expected. The following morning, Christopher convened an emergency summit. 5 families controlled organized crime throughout the Pacific Northwest. His was the largest, but the others had resources and influence. He called them all to neutral territory in Seattle. A conference room in a hotel owned by one of the families. Security so tight you couldn't breathe without being watched. I went with him. Lucia came too. This was about survival now, not protocol. The other bosses were men in their 50s and 60s. Old guard who'd built empires over decades. They looked at Christopher with respect, and Christopher looked back with the confidence of someone who'd survived an assassination attempt. He laid out his proposal clearly. Total war against the Cartel del Golfo. Combined resources, coordinated strikes, attacking their supply chains, their distribution networks, their money, using every contact they had in law enforcement to bring federal heat down, destroying the cartel's ability to operate in the region so completely they'd never rebuild. "This will be expensive," one of the bosses said. An older man named Giovanni, who controlled operations in Washington. "Resources, men, time. It will be more expensive if we let them think they can attack our families and walk away," Christopher countered. "Today it's me. Tomorrow it's one of you. We unite now or we fall separately." The vote was unanimous. All 5 families committed. War was declared. What followed was 2 weeks of orchestrated chaos. Christopher coordinated with military precision. FBI raids hit 4 more cartel locations based on intelligence we'd been feeding them. His allied families attacked supply routes, intercepted shipments, eliminated mid-level distributors. Banks froze accounts after tips about money laundering. Every pressure point was exploited simultaneously. The cartel hemorrhaged money and personnel. Their West Coast operations collapsed under combined federal and criminal pressure. 3 more lieutenants were arrested. Dozens of low-level dealers flipped to federal protection. Their distribution network fragmented. Then the cartel's regional leader, a man named Rodriguez who operated from Southern California, made his final play. Christopher had been expecting it. Had sources inside Rodriguez's organization who reported his plans. The meet was set for a supposedly neutral warehouse in an industrial area outside Portland. Rodriguez wanted to negotiate peace. Wanted to discuss terms for the cartel pulling out of Oregon entirely in exchange for Christopher calling off the coordinated attacks. Christopher went with 8 men. I stayed at the property with Lucia and Vincent's secondary team. Watched the entire operation through body cam feeds and GPS tracking. Rodriguez had no intention of negotiating. He'd brought 30 men, intended to kill Christopher and end the war through decapitation. But Christopher had anticipated that too. Had 50 men positioned around the warehouse before Rodriguez arrived. had snipers on roofs, had every exit covered. The firefight was brutal and short. Rodriguez tried to shoot Christopher personally, got 2 rounds off before Christopher's return fire dropped him. The cartel soldiers surrendered when they realized they were completely surrounded. But those 2 rounds had hit Christopher. 1 in the left shoulder, 1 in the right side, above his hip. He stayed upright long enough to secure the scene, long enough to confirm Rodriguez was dead. Then he collapsed. I watched it happen through the body cam feed. Watched Vincent catch him. Watched blood spread across Christopher's shirt. Watched the team load him into an SUV for emergency transport to the private medical facility Christopher maintained for situations exactly like this. 6 hours of surgery. Bullets extracted. Damage repaired. The doctors said he'd been lucky. Couple inches different, and the one that hit his side would have shredded his liver. As it was, he'd recover completely given time and physical therapy. I sat beside his hospital bed while he slept off anesthesia, held his hand, watched his chest rise and fall. The man I loved had almost died ending a war that started because I'd taken photographs at the wrong moment. But the war was over. Rodriguez dead. The cartel's leadership decimated, their operations destroyed. Federal prosecutions proceeding against dozens of their people. They no longer had the resources or will to pursue revenge against one photographer. Christopher opened his eyes at dawn, saw me sitting there, managed a weak smile. "Did we win?" he asked, his voice rough. "You won." I kissed his forehead gently. "It's over." He squeezed my hand. "Good. Because I have plans for our future, and they don't involve getting shot." I laughed despite the tears streaming down my face. "No more wars. That's my only requirement." "Deal." He closed his eyes again, exhausted. "No more wars. Just you and me and whatever comes next." I held his hand while he drifted back to sleep. Outside the window, morning light crept across the city. A new day, a new beginning. Christopher's recovery took 6 weeks of careful monitoring in the private medical facility, followed by another month of physical therapy at the property. I barely left his side during those first weeks. Slept in a chair beside his bed. Changed his bandages. Walked him through exercises when the pain made him want to quit. "You're worse than the nurses," he complained one afternoon while I forced him to do another set of arm raises. "The nurses get paid to put up with you. I do this because I love you." I adjusted the resistance on the bands. 5 more repetitions. He grumbled, but completed them. The bullet wounds had healed cleanly, but rebuilding strength took time. His frustration was palpable. Christopher was used to controlling everything. Being temporarily weak grated against every instinct he possessed. During his recovery, I discovered something unexpected about myself. I was good at running things. Vincent would bring me reports and logistics problems, initially to keep me informed, but I started noticing patterns. Inefficiencies in how supplies were transported. Scheduling conflicts that could be resolved with better coordination. The same skills I'd used organizing complex photo shoots translated surprisingly well to managing criminal operations. "You're a natural," Lucia said one evening after I'd resolved a territorial dispute between 2 of Christopher's distribution teams through simple restructuring. "Chris always did things a certain way because that's how his father did them. You're not bound by those traditions. You see what works." By the time Christopher was cleared for normal activity, I'd essentially been running day-to-day operations under Vincent's supervision for 6 weeks. We'd improved efficiency by about 15%, according to the financial reports Lucia reviewed. Christopher noticed immediately. "You've been busy. Someone had to keep things running while you healed." I handed him a folder containing organizational charts I'd created. "Vincent can walk you through the changes we implemented. Everything's documented." He reviewed my work in silence. I couldn't read his expression. Finally, he looked up. "This is good. Better than good. You streamlined processes I'd been too close to see needed changing. So you're not angry I reorganized your criminal empire while you were recovering? I'm impressed." He pulled me onto his lap carefully, mindful of his still healing ribs. "And grateful. But I'm also ready to start keeping my promises." The transition happened gradually over the following months. Christopher began meeting with his most trusted lieutenants individually, offering them control of specific operations in exchange for percentage cuts and continued loyalty. The prostitution rings went to a man named Anthony, who'd run them ethically, as much as that was possible. The gambling operations to someone else. The protection rackets to a third lieutenant who understood they only worked if you protected the people paying. Simultaneously, Christopher invested heavily in legitimate businesses, through shell corporations, Lucia structured to withstand legal scrutiny. Real estate development, a security consulting firm staffed by former military. Technology startups with genuine potential. $50 million moved from criminal proceeds into businesses that could stand up to investigation. It'll take 3 years minimum, Lucia explained during one of our weekly dinners. Maybe 4, but if Chris maintains distance and lets the lieutenants handle day-to-day operations, there's no direct connection to trace. He becomes a wealthy businessman with investments, not an active crime boss. I'd restarted my photography work 8 months after the war ended, but instead of going back to what I'd done before, I focused on something different, documenting communities affected by organized crime, showing the human cost through portraits of families who'd lost members to violence, children growing up in neighborhoods controlled by gangs, women trying to escape prostitution, people trapped in cycles of poverty that made criminal employment seem like the only option. The work was hard, emotionally exhausting, but it felt important in ways my previous journalism never had. I wasn't documenting problems. I was telling stories that demanded solutions. My first exhibition opened at a small gallery in Northwest Portland. 20 photographs, each one accompanied by brief text explaining the context. Christopher came to the opening wearing a dark suit and obvious pride. Watched people study my work with the same intensity he applied to everything. 3 pieces sold that night for $12,000 each. The money went directly to organizations helping the communities I'd photographed. But the validation, the proof that my work mattered to people beyond myself, was worth more than any amount. 1 year after the night Christopher pulled me from a sinking car in the Willamette River, he took me back to that bridge. It had been repaired during the intervening months. New guardrails, fresh paint, safety improvements that might prevent someone else from experiencing what I had. We stood at the exact spot where my car had gone through. The water below reflected the setting sun in shades of orange and gold. November again. Same time of year, but everything was different now. I've been thinking about this moment since you first agreed to accept my protection, Christopher said. He turned to face me fully, the dying light catching his features. About whether I had any right to ask you to build a life with someone like me. Whether I could promise you safety when my world is inherently dangerous. Christopher, let me finish. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small velvet box. I can't promise perfect safety. Can't guarantee that my past won't sometimes intrude on our future. But I can promise that I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of your faith in me. Trying to build something clean enough that our children won't inherit the same chains I did. He opened the box. Inside was a ring that looked antique. Simple gold band with a single emerald surrounded by tiny diamonds. Beautiful without being ostentatious. This was my grandmother's. The woman who taught me to cook and made me memorize poetry and told me that real strength meant protecting people weaker than yourself. He took my hand. Hannah Collins, will you marry me? I was crying before he finished the question. Yes. Obviously yes. He slid the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. Then he kissed me there on the bridge where everything had started, and I thought about how strange life was. How you could be drowning one moment and held safe the next. How the man pulling you from the river could become the person you built a future with. We planned the wedding for 6 months later. Small ceremony in the garden of the property that had become home. Just 40 people. Family and the friends who'd proven their loyalty through months of violence and uncertainty. Lucia was my maid of honor, crying through the entire ceremony despite her usual composure. Vincent stood as Christopher's best man, looking uncomfortable in a tuxedo, but pleased nonetheless. I wore a simple champagne-colored dress I'd found at a boutique in Portland. Nothing elaborate, just silk that moved like water and made me feel beautiful. Christopher wore a charcoal suit and couldn't stop smiling. The man who conducted business meetings with absolute stoicism looked at me like I was something miraculous. We said our vows under late spring sunshine. Promised to love each other through whatever came. Meant every word. The first year of marriage was peaceful in ways neither of us had expected. Christopher continued distancing himself from active operations. I worked on a photo series documenting women who'd left gang life and were rebuilding. We traveled when we could. Small trips to places where nobody knew our names or cared about our history. Lucia found someone, a corporate lawyer named James who worked at her firm and charmed his way past her considerable defenses. We had dinner with them monthly, watched them fall in love with the same careful intensity both Ravellini siblings applied to everything important. 18 months after our wedding, I realized I'd missed my period, then missed a second one. The pregnancy test I bought showed 2 lines I stared at for a full minute before my brain processed what they meant. Christopher's reaction when I told him was pure joy, followed immediately by protective concern. You need to stop working so hard. No more 12-hour days editing photographs. You need rest and proper nutrition, and I'm pregnant, not made of glass. I kissed him to stop the worried rambling. Women have been doing this for millennia. I'll be fine. He relaxed fractionally. I know, but you're my wife, my responsibility. I want to make sure you have everything you need. We documented the pregnancy obsessively. Photographs every month showing my changing body. Ultrasound images pinned to our refrigerator. Books about parenting stacked on every surface. Christopher transformed one of the spare bedrooms into a nursery, painting walls himself in soft yellow and cream tones. Our daughter arrived on a March morning, after 14 hours of labor that tested every ounce of my strength. Christopher stayed beside me the entire time, holding my hand, reminding me to breathe, looking terrified and awed in equal measure. When the doctor finally placed her in my arms, Christopher's expression shattered completely. Tears streamed down his face as he touched her tiny hand with one finger. She's perfect. Aurora Rose Ravellini, I said, watching our daughter's face scrunch up as she adjusted to being outside. Our new beginning. 4 years after the night my car plunged into a river, I stood in the garden of our home watching Christopher play with Aurora. She'd inherited his dark hair and my green eyes, had his intensity and my curiosity. At 3 years old, she was already questioning everything, demanding explanations for how the world worked. "Mommy, take picture," Aurora called, waving enthusiastically. I adjusted the camera on its tripod, set the timer for 10 seconds. "Everyone ready?" Christopher lifted Aurora into his arms. She laughed, that pure sound that made everything else fade into insignificance. I activated the timer and ran to join them, positioned myself beside Christopher, his free arm pulling me close. The camera clicked, captured us frozen in that moment of complete happiness. A family built from violence and chaos and choices neither of us had expected to make. Later, reviewing the photograph on my laptop, I thought about everything that had led here. The accident, the fear, the blood and bullets and impossible decisions. Christopher's willingness to change, my willingness to accept him as he was. We'd built something real from circumstances that should have destroyed us both, found love in the last place anyone would look for it, created a life that honored what we'd survived while reaching toward something better. Aurora appeared at my elbow, climbing onto my lap to see the photograph. That's us, I agreed. Our family. Christopher joined us, looking over my shoulder at the image. His hand found mine, fingers interlacing the way they had 1,000 times before. The way they would 1,000 times more. No regrets? He asked quietly. I thought about the girl who'd been drowning in a sinking car, who'd accepted protection from a dangerous stranger, who'd fought beside him when the violence came, who'd chosen to build a future, despite every logical reason to run. Not a single one. He kissed the top of my head. Aurora wiggled free to chase something in the garden. We watched her go. Our daughter who would grow up knowing she was loved and safe, who would never have to wonder if her parents would sacrifice everything to protect her. I'd spent years photographing other people's stories, documenting their struggles and triumphs, building narratives from captured moments. But this story, the one I was living, was the most important I'd ever tell, not through images, but through the life we were creating, the family we were building, the love that had survived everything designed to destroy it. Christopher pulled me closer. Aurora's laughter echoed through the garden, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was exactly where I was supposed to be.